We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 200 for October 21st, 2020. I'm your host, Chris Webster. It's our 200th episode. Let's talk about what we've accomplished and what's still to come. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Heather in, I'm going to keep saying Southern California because I don't know, it's south, right? It's the south half.
That'll work. Unless you call me for dinner, right? That's my grandma used to say.
That's right. That's right. And then Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
And Bill in Northern California.
Hello.
Or the Bay Area, whatever you want. Yeah. Yep. And Doug over in Scotland.
Hello.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is episode 200. And you know what? To be honest, I don't know if it's out of laziness or if I just don't care about numbers, but you know, we've cruised right on past episode 100 on other shows like Archaeotech and the Archaeology show and a few others. And I never really call it out, but for some reason, I feel like 200 is a pretty big number. And I just wanted to have an episode where we just kind of talked about that, not necessarily about, you know, really even the last 200 episodes, but just, I don't know, just where we've been, where we started and how this all got on. Cause I know we've got a lot of listeners that probably joined us in the last year or so. There's probably a solid turnover because of the nature of this podcast, right? It's CRM archaeology professionals or people that are interested in it. And I can't imagine if you're one of these listeners that's listening and you're not actually a CRM archaeologist or you're not currently a CRM archaeologist, like maybe you were in the past, I'd really like to know what you're getting out of it because maybe we can tailor some discussions or topics. Yeah, right. Maybe we can tailor some topics towards that sort of audience because usually our audience is people in the profession, right? Although I know myself and I know some of you others have mentioned that you've heard this too, but I've heard a fair number of people say that they got back into CRM archaeology because of listening to our podcast. I don't know if they just liked hearing people talking about it again and they got some FOMO and wanted to come back into the business or what, but we had some good comments on the Archeo Field Techs group and the North American Archaeological Tech Forum group in Facebook. I basically said, hey, we're coming up to 200 episodes. If you got any favorite moments or just something you want to mention, you know, let's hear it. And we had some really good, solid feedback about people saying how some people got back in the field or it kept them going or, you know, they just really enjoyed listening to it. So that's what keeps us going too. That's why we like doing it. So, but I wanted to talk, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, you know, we probably have some people that because of the cyclic nature of this business and people coming in and out, we probably have people that are listening now. In fact, I would 100% guarantee we have people listening now that were not listening 8 years ago when we started this whole crazy thing or 8 or 9 years ago. It was 2011 or 2012. I think it was 2012. And I just wanted to tell you guys kind of how all this started. You know, I was doing another CRM news podcast, I called it. I don't know. I think that's what it was called. And I basically had a Google News search looking for topics in CRM. And I was just reading them. There was no discussion. There was no anything. And the only one of the original hosts that I knew, and I only knew online, was Bill. And I think I've been interacting with Bill over through your blog and we were on Twitter and I don't know if we had seen each other at a conference or what, but I was talking to you on the phone. I distinctly remember where I was in Reno when I was talking to you on the phone because I left the restaurant my wife and I were in and I was standing out in the parking lot talking to you about doing a podcast and you were like, you know, you should just do it. You should just do it. And I was like, all right, well, you got to be a co-host then.
Yeah, I remember that night too.
Yeah. And then we just found, you know, some other people that were active on social media. Doug was one of the first and Stephen was one of the first. I can't believe the three of you are still on here and have stuck with it this whole time. And then the other two that we had, I know, right? Yeah. The other two that we had started with us were Russell Aline Willems and Sarah Head. And Sarah Head is still podcasting. She does the Archie Fantasies podcast, of course. And Russell kind of dropped off the face of the earth for me a few years ago. I haven't really heard from him in a while, and he's not on social media, so I'm not sure what's going on with Russell. In fact, I tried to contact him for this show, but just couldn't get a hold of him. And we've had a few other hosts come and go over the years, but Doug and Steven and I have been the consistent ones that were from day one. And on I would say most of the recordings, occasionally all of us will have to miss one because of work or other commitments, but we've pretty much kept it going this whole time. Bill, since you were the kind of first one I talked about this, did you ever think we'd be going 200 episodes from then, 8 years and still talking about this?
No, I definitely didn't. Not only that, but that whole thing happened after I was getting laid off or I was laid off or something happened and I was between jobs or my job was collapsing under the recession. And I remember you had just started doing your own contracts and were doing your own consulting. And so, I was thinking that direction, but I had a whole family my son, he was like 2 years old back when we first started. Now he's in 5th grade. So I had big stuff on my plate at the time. And so I was still looking for a job and writing the blog, trying to, my whole blog started because I was trying to help people find jobs and we were all networking together, and the stuff that I was discovering worked to help people out was what I was writing my blog posts about. And so I remember thinking that the podcast was just another way to connect with people who at the time, 2012, we were all trying to figure out what we're going to do with our careers and everything. And, the podcast just seemed like another excellent way to get information out. And that's kind of where it all started. This last week thinking about episode 200 was looking back through our catalog, and the ones that we see here on the Archaeology Podcast Network are not the first few ones. The first few ones, I think, were just you starting out.
Yeah.
Just looking at the kind of topics and the guests that we had way back in 2013 and the things that we were talking about. Yeah, you can see we've kind of stayed consistent with a lot of this stuff, but they're almost all things that, at least I thought, were things that folks doing cultural resources needed to talk about or needed to hear.
Yeah, and I feel like enough of the consistent topics within this field change pretty regularly. Like, people going to grad school in the fall. It's always a good topic to have because it's always kind of a different climate with which you're applying to grad school, right? Especially 2020, which is a totally wacky time to be applying for anything. And jobs and the economics and just everything, we could probably cycle through a list of topics every year and have something different to talk about each year that topic came around. And I think we do cycle through some topics just because naturally the idea comes around, right? People are talking about it on Facebook or Twitter or something, and it comes to our comes to the forefront for us, and we have to respond and then discuss it. And one of the things we were mentioning before we started talking here was, I didn't really plan anything for this 200th episode. I just wanted to kind of chat, and I was like, if this doesn't go a full hour, and we're in the middle of recording one right now, so I don't know where this is going to go, but I was like, we'll just, if it doesn't go a full hour, that's fine. I just want to chat about episode 200. And Doug brought up, every time we say that, we're, 3 hours in before we do anything. Nowadays, just to keep the editing down, because I have so much to edit on the Archaeology Podcast Network, we really do try to keep these pretty succinct. What you hear on the recording, what you hear right now, what you're listening to, is typically almost exactly what we recorded. Obviously we cut out, ums and stuff like that for clarity. And maybe if there was a mistake in the internet or something like that, we just have to cut that stuff out. But I don't edit for content. Whatever we say is what we say, unless a guest or somebody else really says, hey, can you take that out? But generally what you're hearing is what we're recording. But back in the day, when we were first starting, I was a new podcaster. I didn't know what I was doing. We were all new, right? And we had no idea what we were doing. So I would just let the recording go. And my God, we would record for 2 to 3 hours sometimes, at least an hour. Every episode was at least an hour and a half long. And then a lot of them were closer to 2 hours. And it was because, we get on those soapboxes. And if I say, what is your opinion on this to one person? Well, I'm not saying it to one person. I'm typically saying it to 3 to 5 people, and everybody has their opinion. And but that's what's been great about this show, is that we've had people from different backgrounds, working in different regions with different experiences, working all over the place. And we've all grown, I think, over the course of this, because like Bill, what you were saying, you were getting laid off or whatever when we were doing this, and now you're Dr. Bill and you're teaching at Berkeley. I mean, who would have thought, right? Who would have thought back in the day that this is where the conversation we'd be having 8 years later?
Definitely not me. Thought I was going to be working at Best Buy or something like that by now.
Right.
Still,
I think we all think about.
It's still a chance, man. It's
well, yeah,
you can achieve your dreams.
The way I'm acting, yeah, you definitely know that's true.
Speaking of, Stephen, you were an American citizen when we started this podcast. I don't know if you are still.
Ha.
Okay.
Canada's very flexible, I guess, then, if they're letting you live there that long.
I'm a permanent resident, but I'm still an American. So,
Gotcha.
No Canadian can understand. So, and Americans can understand it because they just assume that, like, if you're a U.S. citizen, you live in the U.S.
Yeah.
Like, I've had so many conversations along those lines. It's like, no, it's entirely possible to live in a foreign country and not give up your citizenship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which like astounds a good portion of people I've talked to. So
I'll second that. I'll second that you can live in a different country.
And Doug, you've been in Scotland the entire time we've been recording this podcast. I honestly thought that, when you finished school or something, I was figuring, you'd be headed back this direction, or you and your wife or something like that. But now you're married, you're a PhD, and you have a kid, and you're still living in Scotland. I had no idea that would still be the case 8 years later. I mean, it was touch and go for a little while there on you staying. I know that.
Yeah, it was meant to be a year. It was meant to be a year. And like now we're 11 years later, putting in for our citizenship this month. So yeah, it's been a crazy ride. Yeah. And it was, I remember there's a couple of episodes. Oh, this was years ago when we were talking about like, timings and trying to figure out when we could record. Cause we used to do it earlier in the day for you guys and like late afternoonish for me. And then we switched it up, and it was. I remember the conversation because you were basically saying, "Oh yeah, we should try to work out that." I was like, "Well, I might actually be in your guys' time zone pretty soon." That never worked out, and so we've always had to have really weird times for these recordings. Yeah. But yeah, it was touch and go for a while there. But such is life.
Yep, I know. Where's your wife from originally? What country?
Texas.
Yeah, Texas. She's. I didn't know she was from the U.S. or from Scotland. To be honest, I couldn't even remember.
Well, Stephen, your partner is also from the United States too, right?
No, Pauline's from Canada.
Oh, okay.
Which is why I'm here.
Yeah. I like many liberal Americans, from time to time, you click on that Canadian immigration thing, when you're first you see a presidential debate, and then like once that's over, you start clicking on Canada real rapidly. And so I was wondering, how does that work out without being married to a Canadian?
I don't know. Like that is literally the reason I'm here. So it has nothing to do with presidential debates or anything. So I don't get a choice.
Not in your life, but I mean, all of us are just kind of, how in the world? I wonder if I just, walk over there through the forest. Is that going to be okay?
There's a point system, from what I understand, and if you have like a grad degree, you get a lot of points. The interesting thing though is that if you immigrate to Canada and you don't have family, they basically assign you where you're going to live for the next, I forget how many years it is. There's like, it's like 3 or 5 years or something like that. Jeez. Where it's like, you have to live here and for a grace period. I kind of have mixed feelings about it, but because I imagine for some immigrants, it's a really, really hard situation.
Yeah.
But in some cases, I think it works out great because it kind of forces a certain degree of integration, where like instead of like all the immigrants go to the cities, it's like, some of the families end up in reasonably small towns, and it forces the people of those small towns to actually get to know like people who aren't like 3 generations in. So it's an interesting policy. So there is that. You got to watch out for that. If you do decide to immigrate, you could end up in someplace that you don't really care for.
The Yukon.
Yeah.
5 years in the Yukon.
Although Whitehorse is a really nice town. So like if you ended up in Whitehorse, that's okay.
Oh, okay.
So that brings up actually a good question that's actually topical a little bit for archaeology, because, you know, depending on how the next election goes, there might be a number of archaeologists who lean a certain direction saying, I'm just going to move to Canada, screw this place, right? So if they manage to immigrate to Canada and they get assigned somewhere, in your knowledge and experience, what do you think their chances are of working up there in archaeology are?
I don't know.
No,
and
not
I don't know
for the
if
whole country, of course.
Like, I don't know if there's a certain amount of like, well, I have this skill set and you're bringing me on for this skill set, so I need to go where there's a job. That might tweak the system a bit. Not having gone through that process, I can't say one way or the other of how that would work.
If you're sponsored, like in America, now, of course, I don't know the other way around, but if you're sponsored, you're being brought in because you technically, quote unquote, have a skill that an American can't provide to a company, then you usually, I would think, would go where the company wants you to go. So how does that work with this system?
Yeah, I would think that that's pretty much the same. If you're being brought in because a company hired you, you're going where that company wants you to go.
Yeah. Right.
I think the placement program is if you don't, if you're like, right, well, I don't have a job, but you know, and I would assume that they're going to place you someplace where you can get a job, but I have no idea.
I wonder how many people actually immigrate with that intent, just not even having a plan, not having a job, not knowing anyone, but just immigrating because they want to be there. It's interesting.
Almost no one. Yeah. I having gone through the immigration process in a different country, it just reminds me, I remember back, I think it was either 2008 or 2012, they were doing a line of, it would have been McCain or Romney supporters. And they were going along. It was a documentary. And they're like, what happens if Obama gets in? They're like, I'm going to move to Canada. I'm going to move to Canada. And then, of course, 2016, they do the same thing with the Democrats. And they're like, I'm going to move to Canada. No one moved to Canada. Like trying to get to a different country, if you don't have a spouse like Stephen, or, they now call them golden visas. So if you have like $500,000 or $1 million to just drop into like buying some property somewhere, it is almost impossible in most places. No one can really just go, and you might get lucky if, like, say you had an Irish grandparent. That's what I tell everyone, all the Americans who keep trying to come over to the UK. I'm like, look and see if you have an Irish grandparent, because you can get Irish citizenship that way. But it's pretty much near impossible to do it. And even like countries you would think, oh man, like, to be a bit down, you'd be like third world countries. I'm American. I could just go there and set up, and they'd love to have me. No, they wouldn't. Yeah. Like you have to drop some serious money. And like even places like Costa Rica, that you really have to, like, those people who go down there and retire have to buy a house down there. And you have to prove you have so much money in the bank. Like it's not that easy.
Right. All right. Well, while Stephen figures out his next business, setting up a mail order bride or husband service for American field techs, let's take our first break. Sounds like a good business to me. We'll be back in just a minute. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMArch. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. Welcome back to the 200th episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. And that person you heard near the end of the last segment was our newest member to the podcast. And in fact, on the last episode, our second newest member to the podcast, Sonia, was on. She's been super busy, and I wish Sonia could get on more shows. I was hoping Sonia could get on this show, but it's better to be busy than not busy. And she runs her own business and is just killing it. So, but Heather came on, and Heather, you joined us, about a little over a year ago? Is that right?
It's been about a year. I was looking through our Slack notification. I'm like, how long have I been on this? And I couldn't believe, I'm like, oh my God, it's been a year. That's crazy to me.
That is crazy. It doesn't seem like that long at all, does it? Mm-mm. Yeah. When we only talk every 2 weeks, we've only spoken like 26 times in a year. So, I guess that goes by pretty quick.
I was doing the same calculations in my head. Only 26 times.
Nice. How long before you became a host were you aware of the CRM Archaeology Podcast?
I think about a couple months.
Okay.
Months. Yeah.
And that's why I started out the show kind of giving our origin story, because we've been going for 8 years now, but you've only been even aware of us for about a year and a half, right? Mm-hmm. Because people come, and we post things on social media, but to be honest, I don't flood the typical CRM groups on Facebook and such with posts of this podcast, unless I feel like it's something that's just like really critical that we get out there. Then I'll post it, but I don't do it every 2 weeks. I would mind if other people did. Hashtag go ahead and do it anyway. But I'm a moderator of the group, and I feel like I shouldn't do it, right? Because I run the network and I basically, I'm the primary host of this show. So I feel it's one of those self-serving things. But anyway, that's why a lot of people don't end up becoming aware of us. We need to get the word out, because I know that one of the cool things about this podcast is that it is used and even assigned in some cases as listening material for college students sometimes, right? Because we have some episodes that are, really topical for people. And honestly, even some of our older episodes are still probably really good content. And that's been the whole goal of the APN, is to create a back catalog of useful content, right? That stays evergreen for as long as it can. But I don't know, you've stayed, back to you, Heather, you've stayed with us, and you've showed up consistently almost every time, maybe every time since you've been on, and at least more times than you haven't. And that's been pretty great. How do you feel about all this? Were you a podcast listener beforehand?
This was CRM podcast was the first podcast I ever listened to.
Nice.
Ever. And so I was not part of that environment at all. And I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. And so, I kind of picked their brains a lot before doing this with you guys. And, what do I do? Like I'm 49 years old. So my, perspective comes from radio,
Right.
So when you listen to these sort of shows. So, it's a bit different of a perspective, and looking at the numbers that we get and everything. And it's interesting. I just look to my kids and say, okay. And at the end, they're usually around, kind of walking around, and they make comments, you should do that. Yeah. Yeah. Not a good idea. Or I guess it's interesting if you're an archaeologist. I never know how to take that comment, but I've loved every bit of it. It's been it's fun to, have a set of friends and that you're speaking to, that have a mutual understanding, background, but also have very distinct perspectives and and to be able to talk to you guys, every other week is great.
Yeah.
And then to know that, there really has, I have gotten some feedback and, people that have heard the podcast, and I do, try to, I push it where I can. And, my company is very supportive of me doing this, but I think, I think it's a really great, resource for people. And I wish more people would listen to it, not for self-serving reasons, but, these are things that we talk about that I really wish that when I was beginning, I had a window into some of these.
All right, so it seems appropriate that on the 200th episode, I would screw up the recording. We have screwed up
I thought you were kicking me off on this. Like, this was my swan song. This whole 200 episode was a ruse. And you're like, this is how we're going to get rid of Heather. We just don't know how else to do it.
This is how we kill off the co-hosts. That's how it happens. Which, oops, stopped recording. So no, we've gone through a few different, really only two different recording methods in the whole lifespan of this podcast. We started recording on Skype like a lot of podcasters do, but from an editing standpoint, trying to edit more than one or two people is nearly impossible, right? Because Skype gives you, unless you have external software, Skype gives you me in one track, and then it gives me everybody else in one track. And that's hard to edit because people have different voices. They have different timbre to their voice. And I want to do different things to make them sound better. And you just can't do that when it's coming in through Skype, again, unless you're paying for some, external software that'll maybe split it up for you. Or unless your co-hosts are recording on their end, which you really can't. That's just a recipe for disaster too, right? Because now you have 5 different people recording and then have to send you these massive files. So we just use Skype. But for the last 3 years or so, we've been using Zencastr. And while Heather was speaking, I went to type something on the screen, and my mouse, which is not currently sitting there now, was sitting on the stop recording button, because it's the start recording button that just turns into the stop recording button. And I hadn't moved it, and I just tapped my ultra sensitive MacBook Pro mouse, and it stopped the recording. So again, super appropriate that we just shut her down right in mid monologue, 5 minutes into the recording. So
Chris, I was actually thinking, we actually lived through, we started this out when Skype was good. Back when it was decentralized and you didn't have to go through the Microsoft servers. And I remember that because it was pretty good for the first couple of years. And then it just went to crap. But we had so much trouble and pain when Skype switched.
That was my first time using Skype consistently. I'd probably used it a little bit before, but that was my first time really using it consistently and using it to record a podcast for sure. And I just used it because, it was free and it was what we had, right? But we were doing those 1.5 to 2.5 hour long recordings with virtually no problems. If somebody had an internet problem, that's nothing Skype can do anything about, but virtually no issues. You're right, Doug, until Microsoft took over, and then it kind of all went to hell. And we were still using Skype a little bit after that, until we went to, I'm trying to think if there was something between Zencastr and Skype, but honestly, I just can't think of it. I can't believe we've only been using Zencastr about 3 years this fall. And I think it's 3 years, and I can't believe we used Skype for that long. So
for a while there, we were recording some of us were recording our own audio on Skype, because we moved to that 2014 for about a year or 2 or 3, maybe 4, because that was when Skype went to crap and we all had to sort of record our own stuff because we started losing whole chunks of our podcasts.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of dealing with stuff like that, I do want to acknowledge, and Heather, you just haven't had your turn yet, but it's coming. But Bill and Stephen and Doug have all hosted the show, right? Because sometimes I try to be here every time. I try to be consistent. I started the show, and I like to have one every 2 weeks rather than just cancel it, which we have done. It's been rare, but we've done it. And, in most cases, I try to just keep it going at all costs, just get one out there. And Doug and Bill and Steven have all hosted and started up the show and done it. So I don't know I don't know about in the Skype era. I don't remember that, but definitely in the Zencaster era, you guys have done that because it's super easy in the Zencaster era, right? I just give you guys the login and then you just have to learn the couple of buttons to push and then record the show. And I like it when Doug does it because he actually watches. Two reasons. You actually watch the clock. Because you'll start a freaking monologue at 17 minutes in when we end a podcast at 18 minutes, right? And I'm just like,
Chris,
wrap it
it's
up.
usually like 1930. And if I could get in there at like 20 or 21 minutes.
Yeah. And then the best one was the last episode where you had to say goodbye first because it's basically part of the script.
I know. I hate it so much. So that whole like running gag that's been going on for, I don't know, I think like
for a long time,
6-7 years. Well, okay,
half a decade.
We had the gag, but Chris, I remember you used to cut out the time, so no one actually knew it was a thing until like episode 100 or something. But actually, that was because on Skype, and it really started because at one point I forgot to unmute. And I was saying goodbye, and you're like, Doug, do you want to say goodbye? And then then it just became a thing, and it went on. It became a running gag, mainly because I think I forgot to unmute my mic like one episode, which was like episode 16 or so. It was pretty early on.
God, I forgot all about that.
Yeah,
I forgot how it started. Yeah.
Also, what's crazy is that I still think it's funny, just like a Looney Tunes gag. Like each time, I just keep laughing. Year after year, I just keep thinking it's funny. Yeah, no joke. I mean, I think everybody does do it now at this point because I'm just dying in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. I'm curious. I came in and you guys have been doing this for several years, so you knew each other pretty well, at least, from a microphone and speaker sense. I don't know how many of you have actually met each other in person, but how is your number one, perspective of each other changed? And number two, over this time period? And number two, have any of you been able to change the other person's mind on a very specific perspective?
No. The answer to the last, definitely no. I don't think any of us have ever changed our minds from talking to each other.
I don't know. I might concede that point a little bit because I try to kick off conversations because I can't stand dead air. So I'll often give my opinion first if I'm just not sure if anybody really has any strong feelings towards it. Of course, every time you guys have strong feelings towards whatever topic it is, right? And that's why you're all great co-hosts, right? Because you always have something to say about the topic. But I think I wish somebody would take all 200 episodes and make a supercut of the times that Stephen would come on or Doug would come on, especially, and say, Chris, I'm going to have to disagree with you there.
Man, there was a while there for I think a good run of 50 episodes before I finally agreed with you, Chris. I felt really bad. like there was a pretty bad run there where I was like, so Chris, I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one. We almost turned it into a mug or something at one point. I think it was a big shock when I did finally agree with you on something.
That's a good idea. I should put that on our TeePublic store. I forgot to tell you, Doug, it was just a few weeks ago, and I can't, of course, see who did it, and nobody ever puts anything on social media that I can see, but I created, probably back when we started that store, a t-shirt that was just 4, I think, ellipses. It was just dot, 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 and it said bye, and then signed Doug. And you can get it on a coffee mug. You can get it on a t-shirt. Somebody bought 2 ththings, a cell phone case and a t-shirt. And what? I was going to ask you if it was you.
No. I didn't know this existed.
Or his wife.
Probably Bill.
Yeah, I posted it in the Slack channel when we did it, and I think maybe you thought it was a joke, but that's legit. It's on our store, and you can buy stuff.
I thought that was a joke. Wait, no. Can't you go and check out their address or their credit card number?
No, I don't. We don't. It's all confidential. When it goes through the TeePublic store, we don't get any. We just get a Stripe. We get a payment through Stripe at the end of the month, but they control all the transactions. So we get to see how much the transaction was and what our cut was, and then exactly what they purchased, but literally nothing about the customer. So, Bill, if we were selling them.
I didn't do it. No, it wasn't.
Oh, jeez. Now
If
I'm
you
super
bought-
paranoid.
I know. If you're listening to this and you bought that Doug shirt, please send us an email.
That deserves a podcast in and of itself. But
I
all
know,
the
right?
reasons why you would buy that, yes.
Right. Well, and to partially answer one of your other questions, Heather, we have all met each other, and I was actually going to mention this because we.
I haven't met Stephen.
You haven't
never
met Stephen?
Stephen? No,
Stephen,
I don't know
and
what
I
Stephen
have
looks
not met.
like.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a time when all of us were together in the same spot.
Yeah, like
that's
Stephen,
crazy.
I mean, he could be 3'2", 6'5". I have no idea. Like,
I'm taller than Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephen could be bald. He could have like a massive mane of hair. I have no
know.
idea what Stephen looks like. He doesn't put any pictures on social media either. So,
Well, if you follow him on Instagram, you'll know what his ties and his shoes look like, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, he has great fashion sense. I mean, he's. I'm always just wearing a T-shirt and some other rags or whatever, but Stephen always is put together.
Stephen's very
and to be
quiet.
honest, though,
Stephen's very quiet right now. Stephen.
To be honest,
I'm just shrugging.
I don't know at this point if I ever want to meet Stephen. Like, he's so built up in my mind that, like,
I know the list is bigger than
probably be a
that.
disappointment.
Probably.
You won't be disappointed.
Well, I've definitely met all three of you. I mean, I was even over in Scotland for the EAA one time, and actually, Doug enlisted my help there because I think I ran a camera in one of the rooms when you were recording. Yeah, and Tristan too. And then I know Stephen. I think you and I can't remember, Bill, if you were there. We did that one sort of failed experiment where we tried to basically have a session at the SAAs that was a live podcast recording.
Yeah.
There were like 4 people showed up.
I didn't get to go to that one. It was in Hawaii. Yeah, I didn't get to go.
And so, I think I've met each of you at usually the SAAs. I see Bill at the SHAs pretty much every year, but I think at the SAAs it's been, either Stephen or Doug, but I guess not both. Man, I really didn't think about that. So, well, anyway, I have no idea how much time is left in the segment because this is the second half of segment 2 since we screwed up the recording.
I think it's
so,
1 minute.
Yeah, I think it's around now. This is a good stopping point.
Now.
So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Well, let's go ahead and call this right now. That'll give me a chance to mention if you're listening to this in fall of 2020, because we have dynamic advertising now. If you're listening to this in 2021, first off, I'm glad we made it. And second, this is not going to make any sense. However, it's still relevant. If you want to advertise on the APN, especially through the CRMArch podcast, if you're hearing this in 2020, you're going to hear an ad for a CRM firm that's looking to basically staff up. It sounds like they're growing because I saw them advertising on another thing for biologists as well. So check that out. And if you're a CRM firm looking to staff up for the fall or spring, or you want to just staff up for a project, we can sell you, 10,000 downloads, and you can use 2,000 of them for this next job and 3,000 of them for the job after that, however many it takes, and then just put it on the CRMArch podcast and only while the ad is live. Doug, your hand is up, but I'm not going to call on you because the
come on, monologue time.
Hand always goes up at the end of the segment.
If it's good enough, it'll wait.
That's right. I'm hitting stop recording right now. We'll be back in segment 3.
Hi, this is Bill Octor, East Coast Bill, and I want to congratulate the CRM Archaeology podcast on reaching 200 episodes. I am glad that I played a small part on this journey, first as a guest, and then for almost a year as one of the co-hosts of this great show. One of my most memorable times wasn't one of our great interviews or themed topics, which there are plenty of, but one of our improv days where we had to come up with topics. All credit goes to Stephen for this, but he was sort of inspired by me. At the time, I was beginning to look at ways to examine tabletop role-playing games through an archaeological lens. So for the show, Stephen picked up a role-playing game theme and created a table of 10 topics. I would roll a 10-sided die, and whatever topic it landed on, we would talk about that. I found this to be great science communication because we were just thrown into the mix without knowing what we were going to say, which in general is also a great way of describing the magic of the CRM Archaeology podcast. So that was one of my fond memories. of being on the CRM Archaeology podcast. So once again, congratulations on the 200th, and I hope for many more.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show. All right, welcome back to the third and final segment of episode 200 of the CRM Archaeology podcast. And Doug, did you actually have anything important to say, or were you just raising your hand for dramatic effect at the end of that last segment?
Oh, Chris, you know the answer to that.
True story. So let's talk about the future, right? We can keep talking about the present and the past if you want, but I definitely want to kick this off talking about the future, because I listen to other podcasts, and sometimes whether it's a year goes by or 50 episodes goes by or something, a lot of the ones I listen to that have been around for a while, they'll introduce a new segment, or they'll switch something up, and they'll, I don't know, something will change. But, to be honest, aside from really when we started the APN, knocking this down to an hour and being strict about an hour, that's really the only thing we've done. We actually tried to do a segment that we were calling Regulatory Break. It lasted, I think, 4 or 5 episodes, and it was Tom King. I recorded with him separately, and I had some music for him, and he would just record this 5 to 10 minute piece about something regulatory that was either in the news or just that he was going through. And to be honest, Tom really didn't want to keep it going, and that's fine. If he's not into it, then we won't keep it going. But that was really the only kind of extra segment we've ever really done. We might be doing another one because of what Bill is doing right now. He might be doing a segment that he records separately because he may not be able to join us on some episodes for the foreseeable future. But other than that, we haven't really changed a lot. Do you guys think that we should change? Do you think we should just keep things going the way they are? Do you think that there's some segment you'd like to see us do that we haven't done? And Doug, we'll throw this to you because your hand did go up at a legitimate time within the podcast.
All right, this might be a first. Hey, Chris, do you not remember, I think we dropped this around episode 30, but in the very beginning, we also used to do a segment or the first segment or the middle segment. You'd pull out news from CRM or something relative, and we'd talk about that for a segment or two. I think we dropped it, maybe around the 20s or 30s episode, but we did used to do you'd pull out just an article. I think we pulled out a couple, some of us also pulled out some other ones, and we would talk about archaeology in the news. I think we tried to keep it sort of CRM based, but sometimes it was just news stuff. We had that at the beginning.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that, and that makes sense.
And that's why we had 2-hour episodes.
That probably didn't help.
It's when you have episodes that long, people start bringing reading material and reading the newspaper. And, here's something interesting.
Hey, when we had episodes that long, sometimes we recorded in the evenings. Doug, I remember recording later in the afternoon or evening, middle of the week, early on before we moved to weekends. I don't know how some of those, it was just super late for you. I think you were just dealing with it. I know there was at least some drinks involved. I would usually have a glass of wine. That was nice. It's a little more difficult these days when it's in the middle of the afternoon on a Sunday, although I'm on the East Coast this fall. It's 5 o'clock right now. So, it's not too bad.
So folks who are listening too, I guess they were doing all this stuff and I never knew. And years went by, and I was the only one sober on this thing, and they were all having drinks and cocktails together. And then they're like, "Wait a minute, you're not drinking on the podcast?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't know we were supposed to."
You just gave me a really good idea, though. That's just an open invitation. I'm gonna have my Moscow Mule sitting here next podcast. I don't care if it's Sunday at 2:00.
Yeah, right. Sunday at 2:00. That's a perfect time to do it, right? It's like picnic time. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I never even knew.
When we started this out, I was in a closet on the 4th or 5th floor of the building, the archaeology department. It was a big building. The archaeology and history and classics did not have all the floors of that building, but it was the GIS room. The university had good internet, and I'm pretty sure there's like some fire codes that were broken there, but they put like the GIS special software computers in this closet. It was a closet, 100% a closet. So there's also like maps and a bunch of storage stuff in there as well. And but like they only gave out the code to like a couple of us who were doing GIS stuff. So I knew I could always get a room that didn't have like anyone in it and I could record. Whereas Bill would always like call in from like the most random locations. Like Bill would be like, "Hey guys, I'm hiding in the closet from my kids right now," or like, "I've pulled off. I'm on some highway. I'm not sure where. But I'm calling in, guys." And and Bill, I was always interested to see where Bill was calling in from because it was always the most interesting place.
Yeah, that was the beauty of the early days of being able to use Skype because I could actually call in. But you're exactly right. So at my house at the time, there was a closet, and I lived in Arizona, so this closet had no heat or no air conditioning, and it would just sit there boiling, right? So I would hide in the closet because, you're right. My kids and family, really my only success and ability to be on the podcast is to my wife, who rodeo clowns the kids every single episode and has for 7 years. But I started off in a closet also. And I would sit there with the door open, just kind of panting. And then when it was my turn to talk, before I'd talk, I'd close the door real fast and just sit there and burn up. And like, if you could have seen me, my face was just pouring with sweat. My shirt would just be like wet with sweat, sitting in this closet in Tucson, trying to record this podcast.
Well, and that brings up special guests we've had on the show from time to time. Bill, your kids, first off, have been on the show a number of times, either just, and I don't know how many times. I wish we could keep the message history, because how many times did we see, especially during the closet days, when you'd be like, "I'm dealing with child rage. I'll be back in a minute."
When something would just go off and there was a kid screaming in the background. And some of those episodes I'd listen to see if my kid was screaming in the background. Like, "You're going to get me in trouble. You need to be quiet because people are going to listen to this and they want to know what's going on when this kid's screaming like this." So I would listen to them and try to find that spot. And I don't think we ever got any parts where my kids were crying in the background. I don't think we ever got any of that on the podcast.
I don't think so. Although they did come in voluntarily sometimes. I remember them signing off and saying goodbye with you a couple of times, which was nice. And then, of course, one of the I feel like needs a t-shirt himself, but one of our more famous guests has been Ruckus, Stephen's cat, throughout the entire lifespan. Ruckus was so much more vocal back in the day. Is he just kind of like living out his senior years right now, keeping a little quiet?
Well, I think it's for the listeners. We typically record it on Sunday afternoons at around 3:00 local. And that's like prime napping time for him. So he's not awake for this. Like when we used to do it like in Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings, he'd be awake and wanting things and would like basically bellow at me the entire time I was talking. So there were some like I think the best example is if you find my extended track of is the Profiles in CRM podcast segments that you did. We went long. It was supposed to be like 10 minutes long, and we went, I don't know, what was it, 20 minutes or half an hour?
25 minutes, yeah.
And Ruckus was sitting there screaming at me the entire time until like literally the second that Chris stopped the recording. and it didn't matter that I was still talking. Ruckus just, whatever. So nice. I guess he had stuff to say, but now it's nap time. And sleep takes precedent. I mean, he's screaming at me all morning, so it's
nice.
He's still around.
Nice. And Heather, your little
Lily.
dog, I can't remember. Lily, yes. Yeah, has made several appearances.
Yeah.
Nice.
I used to be nervous about that in the beginning, and then I realized it just adds to the ambiance, I guess.
Hey, 2020 is the year of work from home, so we expect kids, dogs, and all sorts of noises on podcasts. Yeah, it's just totally expected. So, all right. Well, again, thinking about the future, Doug brought up some segments we used to do, and again, that news thing really makes sense because that was the first podcast I did, so I was still interested in doing that. And to be honest, I kind of forgot about it, and it wouldn't be the worst thing if we didn't have a I don't know, we always manage to have a topic. And to be honest, I teach podcasting as well. And I always tell people who want to get into podcasting, when you want to start a new podcast, if you think you have a good idea, write down your first 10 episode topics and do it within 2 minutes, right? Start a timer, do it within 2 minutes. And then once you start doing your podcast, keep those ideas flowing. Now, we do have one of our Trello lists that has a bunch of topics on it that we put down through the years. But to be honest, I forget to look at it. And, we're all so busy that half the time we don't have a topic for the podcast until an hour or two before the podcast starts. Sometimes something's blowing up and we'll be prepared for it. We'll be ready and we'll just discuss it. But this is the nice thing about having so many professionals on the show, professionals in this industry, is because we can just get together and bring up a topic and discuss it intelligently for an hour, right? And that's one of the things I like about this. Not that I don't have to prepare for it, but that we can come together and intelligently do that. And some of you out there might be thinking, well, how is it possible? Well, just think about any time you go to a conference or something like that. You end up with a group of people standing in a hallway or something like that, and before you know it, you've missed the next 3 papers because you're having an intelligent conversation with a bunch of people. So that's really nice. But speaking of, again, is there any segments you guys would over the years have thought maybe we should do something like this, or something we've been lacking, or something that I don't know, something that maybe we should look into doing in the future? Heather, maybe I'll throw it to you because you're new on the podcast and you're new to podcasting. I know. So I just maybe there isn't anything because this is so new to you. I mean, still only about a year, but I don't know. What do you think? Is there something we should be covering?
I think that it's good not to have specific segments because there's so much that's going on right now, in CRM and some of the regulations that are changing both locally and in, on a national level, international level, that I think there's enough information for us to work from. I do think that, sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I think that this is a good podcast for both professionals working in CRM, techs working in CRM, and managers. When I first started listening to this, just as a listener, I was listening because I'm a manager, and that's kind of what I thought this podcast was all about. But I actually think that, I would like to see, and we've brought this up before on other podcasts, is that sometimes there's this gap that's been created by some negativity in our discipline, unfortunately, and that's been kind of hurried along by some social media posting or whatever. And I'd like the idea that this is both interesting for managers and for people in all different levels in archaeology, because we need to start coming together as a discipline instead of having this hierarchy or stratification. It's just it's not good, it's not productive, and when you're separating yourselves in that way, it's really hard to work together in a positive way moving forward. How are we supposed to make a difference in our discipline? Our discipline is important. We do accomplish important things. How are we supposed to do that if we're kind of at each other's throats, so to speak? So I think that would probably be the only thing would be, and I think we've done a good job of it, but I think just having more subjects, and that's really nebulous, but having subjects that kind of bring people together and help, techs understand where managers are coming from and managers understanding where techs are coming from, and kind of bridging that gap. That would be the only thing I can think of off the top of my head.
That's definitely something I've thought about. And usually it just comes down to bandwidth and getting this stuff scheduled. But I've always wanted to bring on like a guest field tech, right? Just to be a guest co-host, not really to be a guest that we're going to interrogate and interview, but to just bring in their perspective on whatever topic that we're talking about, right? But then also, guest project managers, guest principal investigators, guest company owners, because sometimes PI and company owner are the same thing, but a lot of times they're just not, and they're two different people, right? Yeah. And bring in those different levels. And again, not necessarily to interview them, but just to have a different perspective on whatever topic that we're talking about. And then maybe sometimes we should be interviewing people just to figure out, I don't know, what are their issues right now? What are the things they want to talk about? What are the things that are important to them? So that's definitely been on my mind, but having the bandwidth to get all that scheduled. If you're listening to this show and you wouldn't mind coming on being a guest co-host and just chatting with us, and we'll probably grill you for the first 10 minutes of the show, find out who you are and what you're all about. But after that, you'll just be a guest co-host and, join it with us. I mean, Chris at archeologypodcastnetwork.com. Just, let me know. That's a good idea. And thanks for bringing it back up. Doug, your hand's up again.
Yeah, legit this time. It's one of those things where, like, over the years, I've always thought, like, man, I should really, like, do a lot more research on the topics that we have and come a bit more prepared than we do. Not like the whole, like, oh man, we have a podcast an hour. I really need to check what we're doing and make sure I actually know what I'm talking about roughly, sort of things. Or part of the way through, start Googling stuff. But I don't know. I think that's kind of like our bit of our style and stuff. And I think some of those ideas, would work. But sometimes I just think actually that would be just a different podcast. If we were super prepared and had, those really polished things where we had a script and knew what we were, knew exactly what we were going to say and all that sort of stuff. I think that'd be a very, very different podcast than what we have. I think we could tweak it, but I think at a certain point, you just end up with a completely different podcast than what we've been doing for the last almost a decade.
You're right, because you guys, every single one of you and all the people we've had as co-hosts on this show are phenomenal speakers in your own right? Like, you know exactly what you want to say. And then we might clean it up in the editing process a little bit, because even I have my own ums and things like that I do. But aside from that, I mean, you guys all have the ability to just chat on a topic that we came up with literally right before the show, and then do 2, 3, 4 minutes and just give your opinion on something. And that to me is phenomenal, right? And you guys always have something intelligent to say, and you just keep it going with really little or no preparation. And that's why this is professionals on the show talking about these professional topics, because you can do that. Stephen.
Well, that kind of reminds me of the early days. You would just randomly call on us. I don't remember if you would do that, and we'd be sitting there, and you'd be like, "Okay, Steven, go," and then I'd be like, because I wouldn't have anything for that particular point in the conversation. And that's, I think, one way we've definitely improved is there are times when I don't have anything I feel like I need to add, or, Bill is on one of his roles and talking for 20 minutes. And, it's a lot easier now, the way we're doing it, to just kind of let it run. And I think with 5 of us on any given show, that it's okay to, all 5 of us don't have to talk on every single point.
Right.
So this has absolutely nothing to do about the future, but there you go. It's one of my reminiscence of the show.
That's right. Yeah, we've definitely changed our styles, and I've really used this show to define how I teach other people about doing podcasts, because I try to make sure everybody has a chance to speak at least once during the recording, but I'm not so crazy about doing it for every segment anymore, right? Like, if you really legit have nothing to say for that segment, then that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But I will try to call on somebody that hasn't spoken or said much later on. And I also try to lead in with something a little longer, so you have a minute. I'll say, Steven, blah, 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 right? Enough to start with your name, so you have a chance to kind of get your thoughts collected and say something. So anyway, we're doing some final thoughts here. Doug, why don't you go ahead?
It was a question for everyone. Actually, 2 questions. I'll ask the first one is, do you guys have a favorite episode or moment or guest over the last couple of years, almost a decade?
Tom King.
I don't know.
For me, Tom King. I
always like the Tom King ones.
Yeah, I've read his books. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like if anybody knows me, if they had heard that one, the latest episode, because I know you've had him on, I was smiling ear to ear the entire time. It was just, I was, as my daughter would say, a fangirl. I was a fangirl the entire.
Nice.
I loved it. Yep.
Nice.
I particularly love the SBA episodes. Normally Bill does it at the SHAs and just gets together with other members of the SBA and talk about stuff. Partly because I'm not involved, so it's like something I'm not in the process of manufacturing as well, right? But I always get a lot out of that and thinking about like my own practice in a way that it's like, I haven't thought about these things because I'm 100% white dude. So yeah, I always get a lot out of those, and I always really enjoy those. And those are the ones I always like push really hard on social media.
Right.
Thanks. I like the ones where we're live at a conference too, because first of all, you can't know what's going to happen next, like the lights being cut off on you in a room, or in the book room as it's being broken down live right there. Everybody's moving their stuff out of the way, and people walk up and are kind of looking at you like, "What are you doing?" But also a lot of times just the kind of impromptu guests that end up being on there too, because they were at the conference, and then hours later you're recording an episode. Those are also memorable ones too.
Yeah, I like the field recordings a lot, and I was going to say the same thing Stephen did too. Is I like the ones where we throw it over to another audience, right? Another voice, not another audience, but another group of hosts. And I like the SBA episodes. I don't know if you guys remember, but we basically kicked off the seeds of the Women in Archaeology podcasts when I think Heather and Ashley was one of the first women on. She was at the same time Sarah was, I think, but Ashley, what was her last name? Bill? God, it's been so long.
Ashley Morton.
Ashley Morton. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So when her and Sarah were on, and then we decided to just basically kick it over to them. I had to run it because we're still doing it on Skype. So I had to record it, but I didn't say anything. And they did basically a 2-parter that was basically a Women in Archaeology perspectives. And I like those because that one spun off into its own podcast eventually. Took a little while after that, but it basically spun off into its own podcast. And Bill, you should push this for these guys. I think because you know them, I think the SBA could do their own podcast, and we could put it right on the APN because they certainly have enough to talk about. So, yeah,
that's definitely a good idea.
Yeah. So anyway, Doug, did you answer your own question?
I did not. I was going to say an episode I really enjoyed. I actually didn't participate in the episode at all, but it was the Dreams episode. Yeah. It was. I really enjoyed the topic. It was just something that was it was both connected to archaeology, but not at the same time. It was a very interesting guest you guys had on. I really liked that episode.
Yeah, that was a weird one because I heard the guy talking about dreams or something like that. He'd written some books on it on a completely different podcast, right? It was like a business podcast. And then they were just asking him about his history, and he said he was a CRM archaeology field technician in the United States. And I was like, wait, what? So I went and looked him up and found him and then just sent him a message. And he's like, yeah, great. Yeah, I'll come on. No problem. I just looked it up. It's Dreaming About Archaeology, episode 65 with Ryan Hurd. So go check that out. Hopefully we'll get that in the show notes. But that was definitely an interesting. I kind of like when we think outside the box a little bit. So
actually, I had a second question, Chris, to throw out real quick because we're at minute 23.
Yeah, of course, that's appropriate. Yeah,
it was just to see did anyone have an episode they disliked or anything, or a question they wish they had asked afterwards on one of the podcasts, or any regrets over the last close to a decade?
I regret this entire podcast, but aside from that, no, I'm just kidding, guys. I love it. No, I feel like sometimes we just don't get, because we've restricted ourselves to an hour, and rightly so. I feel like sometimes we end the show and the conversation isn't finished, which again can be a good thing because I would expect listeners to, keep the conversation going in their own circles, right? That's kind of the hope and dream there. But sometimes I wish we did have 2-3 hour long episodes, but the fact is we don't have the time for that. And I think keeping to an hour makes us more succinct and really get our point across in a quicker way, which is good. But sometimes you just feel like you want to keep that going. And I think that's my only big regret too, is I don't see you guys enough in person, because I think, and when we're at a conference, Bill and I have shared lodging a couple of times, which has been nice. But I think when we're at a conference, it's just so busy. You don't have time even there to just sit down and chat with you guys. And I feel like, as Heather said, I feel like we all know each other because we've known each other for such a long time, but we haven't seen each other very long and been in the same place very long. And we only talk once every 2 weeks. So it's a weird relationship we have. And I wish sometimes we just have more time to hang out and chill.
I know this is a crazy idea, but maybe we should do, you guys ever heard that, I'm sure you've seen the show Drunk History, right?
Yeah.
So maybe the next time we do like an episode where we decide, okay, this one's going to be 3 hours, and we just drink and then see where it goes and where it ends up at the end of the 3 hours. That would be like really drunk archaeology. That'd be fun.
It would just be archaeology, I think.
Yeah, true.
I feel like that nice. May not be the most conducive thing to many people's careers.
Yeah, it would be interesting. That's what I'm saying. We just need to get like at a conference all together and just turn the mic on in a hotel room and just see what happens. That's all I'm saying. Yep. So, everybody bring their favorite bourbon and we'll go from there.
Yep.
So
I'm in.
That's right. All right, everybody. Well, I think, again, we don't focus on numbers very much. I don't even know if we're going to focus on 10 years, whenever that is. I don't even know when that is, but I'm glad we made it to 200. I hope we do 200 more. And I'm always looking for people that want to, come in as a co-host. You might last a little while. You might last a long time. Who knows? But eventually, just cycling people through this as the profession does is kind of the whole point of having a panelist on this show. So if anybody's interested in just becoming a co-host, I mean, really all you need is a computer and a solid internet connection. And I don't even have that half the time. So it's not bad and we can get it done. So I'll just finish up by saying thank you, everybody. Thanks to you guys, especially, Bill and Doug and Stephen for being here since episode 1. I never would have thought in a million years that you guys would still be here. And Heather, I hope you're here for episode 400. So,
me too.
Yeah. So thanks again to all our listeners for sticking with us for 200 episodes. Thanks to the brand new listeners who are starting us on our journey to the next 200 episodes. And if you ever have any topic suggestions or just want to tell us we are full of crap, all our contact info is in the show notes because everybody has their own opinion and we want to hear yours. So we might put it on the podcast though. We'll leave your name out, but that's okay. So yeah. Thanks everybody. And again, thanks for your support over the last 8 years or so in the last 200 episodes.
Goodbye.
Jesus.
We'll see you in the field.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Let's do another 200.
I guess that was the
Chris,
goodbye.
There's a deep
I guess I just need to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
The annoyance of my goodbye.
It always strikes joy in my heart.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everybody for joining us this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in. And I, at least, will see you in the field. I don't know about the rest of those guys. And I'll see you for the next 200 episodes. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Doug, you don't get another shot. I'm hitting stop. You already did your goodbye.
Yeah. It was there.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.